everybody, it's Matt from Eastwood and welcome to another live tech video here in the Eastwood garage. We're broadcasting this on Facebook as well as on YouTube. If you've never watched one of our videos before, we try to make this as interactive as possible. So we have Scott over here that does, you may have spoken to him before, he does our tech and he actually answers a lot of the tech questions. So Scott will be answering questions live, and he's also going to be throwing some questions back to me. If you guys have any questions about metal fab or metal shaping during the broadcast, feel free to type them in, and either he'll answer them or he'll shoot them over to me. What we're covering today is, we've showed you a lot in other videos how to use our tools, the basics to using an English wheel, a shrinker stretcher, all those types of things. But today I wanted to show you guys how to make a panel from start to finish, basically. So we're going to take it from, what we're starting with here is a rusty original piece here. This is a 1928, 1929 Ford Model A front cowl section for a Roadster that I'm someday going to build, that's stashed away in the basement. A common thing that rusts out on these is these side cowl panels here. I made one of these from scratch yesterday and put it on here just to show you guys what we're going to be making. So by the end of the broadcast, we should be basically to this point. And this is what we're starting with. So follow along, ask questions. If there's anything that you see that doesn't make sense or you want more info, shoot a question over to Scott and we'll try and answer it the best we can. So let's get started. So we're going to go over to the bench here. And I'm going to show you guys first how to lay out your piece. So it's good to have this paper here. Some of the masking paper is good to have on hand to make patterns out of. It's flexible, it kind of acts like the metal, and it's easy to see through and draw on, and it's pretty cheap. So I have a piece here, rough cut, and what we're going to do, I'm going to show you guys briefly. I have a piece already made, but I'm going to show you guys briefly how to start making a pattern, a good way to do it to help you make the rest of your piece. So what I like to use is, we got the paper here. We have these stitch weld magnets that are pretty handy. We call them stitch weld magnets, but they are rare earth magnets that are super strong. These are really good for when you're using a paper pattern on a piece that you can put it on and you can kind of just push the paper around and it's going to hold the paper down so you can kind of draw on it and use it. So I try and get it near the edges as much as I can. Hold the paper down. And you're trying to take as much of these wrinkles out as you can as you're doing it. So feel for our edges and get pretty close to them. So you're trying to get most of these wrinkles out of the piece as you can. So this part looks, if you just glance at this part and you've never messed with one of these before, they look pretty darn flat. It doesn't look like there's much to them. But this is a deceivingly difficult part because it actually has kind of like a reverse curve, a belly in it. And then there's actually a curve the opposite direction, a compound curve that goes around that makes it a little difficult to make the piece and kind of get it to flow. So got most of the slack out of this. So now we got our paper that's kind of too big here. And what I want to do is just establish the outside edges on the metal. So we're going to go around and try and mark that. So a trick I learned from somebody a lot smarter than me is to take a pencil and cut the side off of it, just a normal lead pencil. Cut the side off of it. And then what you can do is you can fold your metal over and use that. I'll try and tilt this up so you guys can see. So this is pretty much a straight edge here. So I'm folding it over. I'm using this pencil to kind of just find the edge of the panel. So that'll give you your hard edge that you need to find for the end of the panel here. So go around. So you just kind of feel, we got a point right there. And then in here, The paper's kind of bunching up, but we're gonna. Difficult part with this one is that the bottom's kind of rotted out, so we gotta kind of work with it, and we're gonna have to take creative. We're gonna have to take some creative license here on this. So I've looked at photos online, and I know that this just folds underneath. So this piece here, we're not going to worry about. We know that back in here it goes to about there. I'm more worried about these edges over here. So I'm going to fold it over, find the edge, use the pencil to kind of go across and establish where our line is. So that's going to give us a border, help us find this. So this piece up here has this is where it's kind of got some shape to it. So you can see the paper doesn't want to, the paper acts like the metal. It doesn't just, it has to go somewhere. So it's going to want to wrinkle up. It kind of tells you what it needs, what the metal is going to want to do. So again, I'm just getting this edge here all set up with our pencil. So there's our hard edges for the outside of what will be the visible part of the panel. Now I say the visible part of the panel because we have to add extra material because this bends over, and from memory I believe it has about a 1-inch return or 1-inch flange on 90% of the bent edges on this. There's a 1-inch flange. So we need to fold it over. I have it on the other piece here. I'm not going to have you guys watch me draw the whole time, but I have it folded over, and we do the same thing. We fold it over on the back side here. I'll do just this little bit on the back side here, and same thing. You can go right along that edge like that. And that'll give you your piece when you lay it out flat. It'll kind of show you where the edges of your panel need to be. So what's kind of cool with the paper here, and I'm going to cut. We got some excess here. Handy little trick. You don't need scissors. These are shears, aviation snips. They cut paper just fine. If they can cut metal, they can cut paper. So I got a little bit of the excess going here. So in here, it's kind of fighting me a little bit. And in here, when we pull it across, in order to get this tight on this side, we're getting extra metal here. So you see that you kind of need to bunch the metal up, or the paper in this case. You've got to kind of bunch it together to get it to fit, so it fits tight. So what you can do is you can actually cut this. If you're trying to really make something that's complex, this piece is not, the actual part of shaping this piece isn't too bad, but what I do is put a little slit in it, and then what we can do, put our paper down and put it like this, still got excess there, like that, and you pull them together like this, and we'll try and get a close-up of that. So you fold the paper together, you make a cut in it, fold the paper together and overlap it, and then what I do is I take some tape here, I'll take a little piece like this and just put it together like that to hold those cuts together. So you just go along, make everything tight, put your cuts in where you need to be. So this side is telling me that I need to shrink. There's too much metal, we have to overlap the paper, so that's telling me that I need to shrink this edge to get it to pull together how it needs to be with how the paper's sitting tight. On this top edge here, it's actually the opposite. With the way the bend is, there's not enough metal, and even though that's looking like a fold, that's just the magnet pulling too tight. There's not enough. So what you need to do on the top edge here is we're going to have to put a slit in. Oop. This is hard to do. Oops. Let me turn this here. So we're going to do that, and then when we fold it over, you can see it pulls it apart and it's letting us kind of lay it down. It's not fighting us as much. So that's telling us that we need to stretch. So you just watch what the paper does. You put a little slit in it, and I like to put a couple slits in it until it lays nice and flat, and then I notate those. So, and our magnets are too strong. So that's that. I'm going to go over here to the piece we already made. Take our magnets off. Take all these magnets off here, and then I'm going to show you the piece that the pattern I've already made that's a little more refined, so you guys don't watch me for 45 minutes making a pattern. So we'll throw that over there. So this is the pattern that I made yesterday, got dialed in. So you can see along this top edge here, I have cuts made where it's opened up, it's V'd out, and I put little ST next to it so it reminded me that I needed to stretch. I usually transfer those to the metal so I don't get lost when I'm working on a piece. So sometimes when you're in the heat of working on something, you'll forget, do I need to shrink or stretch or what? So if you have marks on there, it'll just kind of keep you in line. And then over here I have shrink. So that's the areas where it was overlapping. I pulled the tape back off so we can lay it on the panel here. This piece, just to show you guys the shrink and the stretch, why that's there. You can see the center right there. We're just trying to get it so you guys can see. So I got a straight edge on here. You can see there's a belly in this panel here. So front to back on the panel, there's a belly on the piece. So that's why we need to stretch that top edge, because when we stretch it, it actually puts like a belly in the panel there. But when we go on this far side here, the part that makes it even a little more difficult is the panel curves like in. You can actually kind of see it here, but you can see how my piece is sitting, or my straight edge here is sitting. It starts diving down probably way back in here. This piece starts to dive down. So you can see I got a gap on my straight edge here. As we go, we got a gap getting bigger, bigger, bigger. So that's telling me I need to do most of my shrinking from here down. I need to shrink it so that it's going to pull this edge around. So we got a compound curve. We got a curve going this way until about here, and then down in here it curves the other way. So that gets a little tricky. You got two curves kind of meshing together, and it gets a little hairy sometimes. But you got to identify it, read the panel like that, kind of see what it needs, use a paper pattern. Most of the times when I've had problems or I've made mistakes or gotten frustrated with a panel, it's because I dive right in. I don't take the time to actually read the panel like that and figure out what it needs. I just want to get right into English wheeling or shrinking or stretching the panel. So that's a good thing to do. And like I said, this panel looks sort of flat, but if you've ever looked at one of these up close, it has some kind of weird shape to it that makes it a little difficult. So I have a piece here I'm going to show you guys, just laying out the pattern on the paper, or I mean on the metal. So we got our flat metal here. We got our pattern that's more refined. So I'm going to lay that down. Let's see if I can turn this here. So we'll be using that stuff later. So here's our pattern. I got it laid down on the metal. And I'm just, this bottom edge is basically a straight edge for the most part. So I'm going to line it up with this bottom edge on this panel that's already a straight edge. And you do the same thing. Take these little stitch weld magnets, lay them out on your piece, on your pattern. Now if you're making something out of aluminum, obviously these magnets aren't going to stick to it. But the cool thing about these magnets are they're so darn strong that if you got a metal workbench, like a steel workbench like I have here, a lot of times it'll pull through the pattern, through the aluminum and into the metal on the table, so you can still do the same thing. So you can still use these for aluminum, you just got to use a table that's steel. That's within reason. If you get too thick of aluminum, they may not, but for any aluminum you're using to shape, these should be able to pull through. So same thing, we're just laying it out flat. We took our tape off so that we can lay it out on the flat piece here, like this, that. All right, center piece here. We're just trying to get some shots from above so you guys can see what's going on. So this is the piece here. I got it all laid out. I got marks on here with what we need to do. So this piece right here has a step in it. So we're gonna show you how to do the step bead in there using our bead roller. I like to run a test piece, so I did one yesterday to kind of see which order to do this in. And for me, it seemed to be the quickest and easiest as far as die changes go. I'm going to do this step bead first, and then I'm going to do these other edges here, the bent edges, last. So I like to notate everything, step bead, bends, everything right on my piece here. Why I like to do this is, well, I'm going to keep this pattern. I'm going to fold this up, put it away in the archives, so the next time I need to make one, I got my pattern already made. I know what it's supposed to look like. I've already got it fitting pretty decent there, so I know it's pretty darn close. So you can save these patterns, put them away, and then if you need to make it again, it's easy enough to do that. So we got it laid out here. What we need to do is, of course, I'm going to Sharpie my edges here, or you can use a scribe. But since most of these are bent edges, we may be trimming them at the end, so it doesn't really, within reason, doesn't matter too much if we're a Sharpie line fat on this. So these little notches I got in the side here, these are basically where we need to put like a relief cut in because we have pieces bending in two different directions. So we need to put some cuts in there. And while I'm drawing this, Scott, is there any questions at all that we have, or are we everybody mesmerized by Sharpie?
No, they definitely like your work. Reginald did ask if you've ever heard of anyone using a wheelbarrow as a firewall.
A wheelbarrow as a firewall. Yeah, I actually referenced that. We did a bunch of Model A videos for another Model A I have, and I made a trans tunnel in the video from scratch, and I referenced that in the video. I don't particularly like that method, but it's been used for years. I mean, I've heard of that being used. Wheelbarrows, half of 55-gallon drums in a firewall. And that was okay back in the 40s and 50s, maybe, when it was more difficult to get these type of tools. But I would say nowadays, there's so many, it's so affordable to get these tools. There's really no reason that you should be using a wheelbarrow to weld into the firewall of your car. If you watch a couple videos like the ones we have, we show you how to use with a handful of tools. You can make a nice professional firewall, or I'm guessing he means like a notch in the firewall for an engine, like a setback. You can make something pretty easily that's going to be a lot better looking, because in the end, the ones I've seen, they still look like a wheelbarrow welded into a firewall. So I don't like it. Guys have been doing it for years. I'm sure it works just fine, but I would try and use just normal metal and wheel something up or shape something up. Is that the only one we got so far? Good. Yeah, it's cool. I'll talk about whatever. I like anything metal and car related. Happy to do. So we draw this out along the lines. You guys get the idea. I got another piece cut here. We're going to do the cooking show type thing, so you're not watching me cut metal for ages. So I got my outside edges drawn here on this piece, imagine. Now what I did with that pencil mark that's on this piece here, that's our bend lines or our bead lines. So here I did where our step bead needs to be. I used the pencil and did the same thing. These are all of our bend lines on the panel. So now that we've done that, what you can do is you can take one of these spring-loaded center punches that we sell. We have a sheet metal layout kit that's real handy if you guys are just getting into doing metal fab or metal shaping or sheet metal work. Definitely get one of those kits. If you're already into it, you may have some hand-me-down type stuff that doesn't work too good. For years I was using just a normal center punch with a hammer. This guy's really nice because I don't need to have the hammer out. It has a spring in it, so you can just hit it and it'll actually center punch it. So what I do is I put it right on the paper, and it'll actually punch right through the paper. And I put it right in the center of my bend line and hit it. And then we'll move to the next one. Move over here. And basically, I'm kind of moving around. I'm going to, just so you guys can get a better angle, I'll move some up here. So I'll get right in the center of that pencil line and hit it. And you just want to do it, a bunch of them close together. What that's doing is so it's transferring a dotted line, so you know you can take this paper off and we can trace it, and we know that's right where our bend line needs to be because we're doing it right on top of our pencil line that we've made in the beginning. So that's how to lay it out. Use the center punch, and this is the piece I've already made here. And I've already drawn my lines out on. I've connected all the dots, but see if I have a, probably don't have a good, it's hard to get the dots here. But all along this edge, you might be able to catch it in the light. There's little dimples that get made that it punches through the paper, into the metal, and then we can follow those. So all I did was just freehand, I just traced between the dotted line. So we're just trying to pick those up. So those little center punches, that way we're not trying to mark, just blindly mark where we're bending. We know that we center punch right through the center of that line the whole way through, and we're good. So I marked my panel to match. Again, I sometimes do this too much, but I get absent-minded at times and I bend something wrong and wreck the whole piece. So we put our marks here, bend, 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 but I want to step bead here. And then I've also put my shrink marks, so that after we get everything bent, I can kind of remember how to shrink and stretch this panel. So we got our flat panel here. So we're pretty much ready to start putting some shape into it. What I've done is on the back side, because we're going to tip the edges, I've transferred, when you do the center punch, if you have your spring set, harden, the tensile strength or whatever, the spring back on it is hard enough, you should be able to see a little tiny dimple through the metal. You want nice clean metal, and if you're in good lighting, you can see the dimple, and we can just follow it along, do the same thing. So these edges where we're tipping the edge, I need to actually mark the back side because we're going to be tipping it up so that it tips in the right direction. So I've marked that on the back side here already. That's good. It's good to lay everything out ahead of time so that it's all ready to go and you're not stopping to try and figure out where everything is. So Scott's going to come over and give me a hand with the bead roller. So what we have here is we have our step dies on, wonder if, probably not, it's going to be difficult. What we have is our step dies here. If you're watching this, we dropped a link in the comments with a link to the products. So we have a page right on our website now that has all the products that I'm using today. If you want any more information on anything I'm talking about here, click on the link on the product page and it'll give you a video and all the information right there on the page so that you can learn more info about it. So I'm using our step dies here. We have a bead roller forming kit die set that comes with these step dies and a bunch of other ones. So the two sets of dies that I'm using today are from that kit. And yeah, so we're going to set this bead roller. So the cool thing about these dies are we don't need really any tools. I leave everything pretty loose. And I'm just tightening this tension screw up till it's basically finger tight. You don't need to put a ton of pressure in there because without the metal in there, when it's touching, that's basically material thickness is what it's going to offset this. And I have these pretty tight together. You can spread the two dies apart and it's going to give you more of a rounded step in it. But in this, we want a nice sharp step. So I put the two of these right there together and we're going to put them through and roll it. So I'm setting my bead line. This is the top of our bead, not the valley. I'm setting it right up on the outermost ridge, and then we're going to roll. All right, go ahead, Scott. It's nice and slow. I know, silence. So I do the little squinty-eyed deal. I don't know if it helps or not, but for me it seems to work pretty good. We have a bunch of videos showing these bead rollers in action. We did a bedside of my old pickup truck that I have at home, pile house. We did a bedside using these dies and made a whole entire 8-foot bedside. It's pretty cool. All right, slow down, and we're going to go right to the edge there. So keep going a little more, All right there. All right. Let's get our little step. Now, because the panel's in there now, I'm not going to be able to loosen this by hand, so I just got a set of quick pliers here to loosen this up. All right. So now that we've done that, cool. So we got our step put in here. So this step here, oh boy. Step here, we're mimicking the step that's on this side. So that's what we're at right there. So we put that first step in there. It's the only time that we're going to be using that die. So that just has that little step. What that's for originally on the car was the hood sides for the Model A. They fold down and they sit on here, so when it's together it's basically flush. So that's our step that we got in here, basically flat. Now for the rest of this, we're going to be tipping these in the bead roller. So because these edges have a curve to them, we can't just put it in the brake and bend them. There's just no way that you can bend a curved line like that in the brake. You might be able to do it with a hammer and dolly, but it's pretty crude and it's not going to turn out quite as nice. It's a little hard to control. So we're going to use the bead roller to do that with a different set of dies. So what we have, this is our most narrow upper bead roller die that we offer. So this die is fairly, I don't want to say sharp, but it's just narrow, so you can make a nice tight line in something. We offer some wider ones that have rounded edges, so if you want to put more of a rounded curve in something, you can do that. But these pieces here, they were originally stamped, so they have a nice, sharp, defined edge in them. We can get pretty darn close using this die. So we're going to use this, and if we need to tune it up a little bit, we can. Now, a lot of times what is coupled with this die is the soft rubber wheel, or skateboard wheel, some people call it, because back when some of the guys, first people started messing with these, they were modifying skateboard wheels. But we have an actual rubber wheel here that is pretty durable and slides right on. So normally, for most instances, we're using this die here with the rubber wheel in it. But because I'm trying to make such a sharp bend in the metal, I'm going to kind of swap around dies. This is a rounding over die, but I'm going to use it, the flat edge of it, right on this one. That's so that it's not going to dig into the rubber. It's going to be a hard, as sharp of a bend as I can get with this particular die. So that's what we're using here. We're going to put this one on the top. So to swap these out, it's pretty quick. Little 4mm Allen wrench. And Scott, if you got any questions as I'm swapping this out, feel free to yell.
Right now we're good on questions. Just Reginald does say that how much he loves his bead roller, how well it works for him and the things he's been creating with it.
Awesome. Yeah, this little bead roller, I've done I feel like miles with the bead roller. And if you have a helper, it works pretty darn good. I mean, you can't beat it for the price. The amount of stuff that you can create with this is pretty crazy. We do offer a power bead roller, which is pretty handy if you work alone a lot, to have the power bead roller. It also is a little stronger. It can roll. We're working with 18 gauge today. If I crank this down the roll of beads, Scott's going to be working pretty hard to crank that. So with the power bead roller, it can do 18 gauge. I've even snuck away with getting some 16 gauge, even though somebody might yell that I said that. But you can get away with it if you talk real nice to the machine. It'll let you.
Question.
Sure.
Can we angle it a little bit this way so I can see the metal coming out?
Yeah. Let's see if we can angle this for Randy. Don't ever use your body hammer for a normal hammer. Whatever you do, don't do that. but it's the only hammer we have. So we're going to just flip this vise here so that we can get a better shot. Is that pretty good for you? Oh, this is good. This is good for me. All right, so we're just turning this so you guys can see a little better as we tip the edge. So tipping the edge with using a bead roller, we can actually follow a curve, which is pretty cool. So unlike a normal break, where you're kind of stuck in doing just a straight line. So I'm just tightening these up. Now we slid them on there. So I'm using just this top flat section of this rounding over die on here. So now that we got that, we'll have Scott help us do this process. So all of these lines here, this one here, we could actually, this bottom one, we could, so you can see it, this bottom one, we could probably do with a brake, but because we're doing these two bends here, we're doing with the bead roller already, might as well just roll through and do it with that one as well. So let's start with the short one, and we're going to flip this over. So this is where we made our lines on the back side. So if we had it flipped to my lines on the front side, our flange is going to be like this, not what we want. We want the flanges to go back. So you want our flanges to go back from the face. So we're going to have to flip the piece over and roll it on these lines that I've already made here. So let's see. We'll start with this one. Oh, yeah, so same thing. You just want basically finger pressure on this because on this particular die, we're not even really pressing anything into the metal. We're kind of just using this as an anvil almost. We're forming it around this top die here. So I'm going to try and stay. So we're going to go slow this first one. And I'm just putting some light upwards pressure on it. So what I'm doing is basically scoring the metal. So we're giving it a track. So this is where I like to go nice and slow so we can make sure we stay on that line. I'm not putting crazy pressure on the piece. Just kind of letting it score. So once you put this score in it, it kind of gives it like a railroad track or a trail to follow. So every time we go from here, it's gonna be easy. All right. So for this particular one, you know what? Let's do a trick that we did just the other day. So we're going to go backwards, so I don't have to take this back out. And we're going to follow her. So I'm putting a little more pressure on it. I'm only doing this because we don't have to loosen the bead roller because I don't want to roll over that back edge. So I'm putting just a little more pressure on the piece, upward pressure with my one hand. I'm letting Scott doing all the work with the feed. So I'm not really pulling, I'm just kind of guiding the piece here. And since we already got a score in it, it kind of makes it want to follow along here. All right. So we're at about a 45, so I'm going to go a little more pressure now. So feel free to ask any questions you guys got, and Scott will get to them once we get these beads these edges folded over. So we're folding these edges. So we're going to do, all right there. So let's do one more. We're going to follow back the other direction, and I'm going to try and get this fairly close to 90. Now we can use the hammer and dolly to fold it over anymore if we need to, or tune it up along the way. But now it's pretty much got that score in it. I'm not really guiding it all that much. I'm just kind of focusing on that upper pressure. All right, and you can roll all the way off this time. All right. So we got our bend there. Tipped it over. We can sharpen it up a little more if we want with the hammer. But that gets us pretty darn close by rolling it there. And like I said, we can kind of fine tune it with the hammer and dolly if it needs to go down a little bit more. I get the panel pretty darn close like this one is, and then you start fitting it to the car. You're going to have to hammer and dolly and tweak and get it all sitting right. But what we can do is we can build it to this other piece, and then we can start fitting it to the car. So we got that one made. Do we have any questions? Everybody's just watching. Okay.
Yes.
I think we're ready to roll our next.
Yeah, so everyone's just right now just checking it out, and they're loving watching it.
Cool. Well, we're going to do these two bends real quick. Get these both done, well, as quick as we can do them. This long one is probably the most difficult one here. It's a long sweeping one that we have to bend up, and we'll really show you what the metal tells us at the end here. So this one I'm going to actually start. So what I'm doing is I don't want to, I like using the hand tension here. So what I'm going to do, we're going to roll, even though this edge is getting bent the other way, we're just going to roll over it, but I'm not going to use any tension. I'm not going to push up on it at all till we get to our line here. All right, go ahead. Nice and slow. So again, I'm just focusing on trying to keep that line as close as I can. So putting a fairly light pressure on it. Probably putting a little more than I would normally just to try and speed this process up a little bit. So we're going to run into a little problem here at this corner. Keep going. We're going to run it right into this corner. And what we're going to have to do is actually kind of use some hammer and dolly work to get in there. All right. So again, save some time. And I'm going to push up a little more and try and follow this line here. So just following the line, I'm trying to stay over top of it here so I can see. The second one, you can go a little askew if you're not careful, but it kind of wants to ride in that track that you've already made. All right, keep going. Got a little off there, but that should be okay. Keep going, right there. All right, so I'm going to try and make this. We'll see if we can get it. We may have to do another one after this. But, so I'm just pushing up. Rolling the same thing.
I guess you would say patience is definitely key when working with metal, right?
Yeah, patience is key, and don't be afraid to throw a piece away. I'm still bad at that, to be honest. I try and muscle my way through it, knowing that I made an error at the crucial spot, and then the piece ends up turning out like garbage, and I redo it anyways. So you just got to take your time. Like I said, reading the panel ahead of time is key, so we kind of understand what we need to do. All right, I think we're good there. You know what? Let's just go back one more since we'll just be able to roll off the piece here. You can go a little faster this time because we got a nice track made here. All right. And we're just going to roll right off the piece here. All right. So we're going to do the bottom one, but you can see got that pretty nice sharp edge there. Now that's because we're using that hard bottom die. Right up here in the corner, we couldn't get into it because it's hitting. So I'm going to have to use a hammer and dolly and kind of fold this edge down into itself, but I'm going to do that kind of last. Scott was just checking the questions. You guys got any other?
Yeah, Jason asks, could some level of forming be done with the standard dies that come with the bead roller?
So Jason asked if there is a little bit of forming that you can do with the dies that actually come with the bead roller standard. It comes with a bunch of different dies. Potentially you could, but most of the dies are set up for a bead, so they're not, it's going to be flat and then have a little bead and then another flat. So like what we're doing here, forming it, you need something that's a real sharp edge like this, which really, you could kind of, but you're not going to be able to do the type of stuff we're doing here. You might be able to fold an edge a little bit, but you need this sharp upper die to fold it, or if you're doing the step, you need those pieces that match each other. Now we do have two dies that are kind of like a step that come with it that some people use to shear. They could work, but you can't do too much other than just rolling beads into the panel.
Yeah, I have two more too.
Sure.
Ron also asked, is there advantage to pulling versus pushing the piece when you're doing the bead rolling? That's the first one.
Okay, so Ron asked, is there advantage to pushing or pulling when you're using the bead roller? So I like to feed, for 90% of the time, I like to feed the panel like this all the way through. I don't like to come backwards. That's because you can stand way back on the panel, and I like to just squint and keep an eyesight and roll it through on the bead roller. The only reason we were rolling both directions here is because we were kind of stuck in here, and I would have had to pull this piece, loosen this up every time to go back and forth, where once I have that scored line in there, it kind of follows the track, so it's not like when you're rolling a bead in a panel and you got to be dead on, you get one try. So like we did with the step bead, I fed it through. I don't like pulling towards me because you're going to actually be kind of walking backwards like this, which I don't particularly like. So pushing it through 99% of the time is the way it's best. But just like anything, if you can roll off some beads with pulling it towards you, go for it. There's no rule that says you can't do that. It's just whatever's comfortable for you, and you can make straight, nice beads.
You know, the only other one was from Chris, and I'm not sure, off the top of my head, I don't know how thick the metal can be in metric.
If I had my gauge here, I could tell you.
Yeah, I wasn't sure
I don't recall. I'm horrible. I should know that. But it's 18 gauge. If you do a little Googling real quick, it should tell you the conversion to metric. These cars mostly were made out of 19 gauge, which is pretty difficult to get. 18 gauge is really close, a little bit heavier. So it usually works out okay. You can order 19 gauge, but it gets expensive. I like to use an 18 gauge. I mean, I ordered a whole sheet, and it was like $60, and we can make all sorts of panels for a Model A with a $60 sheet. These pieces here normally cost $80 or $100 for a set of these panels if you buy the repops, and they kind of don't fit well. You're still going to have to do a bunch of work on those to get them to fit well. When you can just make one yourself, spend that $100 on a tool that you can keep using for the life of your project, or for your life rather. All right.
And also a quick search. It looks like it should be 050. I could be wrong, but it appears to be the metric equivalent for 18 gauge.
050 would just be the decimal conversion. He's asking, like, is it?
Oh, okay, right.
He's looking for, like, is it 4 millimeter or
Right,
whatever?
I don't have that.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I should. Yeah, we're going to do on this one. we're going to put it in. And so because this is, we're just bending it over, we can get away with just putting a little, I'll probably use my pliers and just get it a little bit tighter in, since we got the metal actually in there. I'm kind of just putting a little tension on it just so the metal doesn't slip around as easily. So same thing, we're just gonna, this is basically a pretty much straight line. We're just gonna score a line in it with a light pressure. All right, and we're gonna go backwards. Just letting off the pressure a little bit because it's getting a little too greedy there. My line's probably a little askew there. I was trying to bend too much at one shot. All right, let's hold 1 second. I'll refresh my memory here. This guy actually bends over, so we can roll. Let's, I just wiggled the piece out. We're gonna actually roll this all the way off. But there where I looked at my piece, I let the panel slip out. So before we go any further, let me get back onto our track here. And then we're gonna roll. I just realized as we were doing that final roll, I remembered that this little leg here actually rolls under, even though there's a step on it. It actually rolls under a little bit. So we're gonna continue back. Come on. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. So I'm going to try and go ahead, see if we can get him to roll there. There we go. So this little leg there kind of rolls underneath, so I'm just... All right. Go ahead. Piece got a little wonky there because we keep going. Getting there. All right, let's roll back one more time and we'll see if we can, see if it'll let us. Hold on 1 sec. There we go. All right, we're going to roll right off the panel there at the end. And off. Cool. All right. So, thank you, Scott, for the help. I know that was a little boring to watch for a few minutes there, but here's what we got. Got our bent edges. Got our basic shape going here. It's kind of looks like something. But the shape doesn't really match. If we start putting a profile gauge on this, it's not going to match the same as this one. Remember our pattern? We had those little marks that said shrink, 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 where we cut it and overlapped it. Well, that's kind of telling us what we were doing. So we see right around where some of these marks were, we got little tucks or puckers that we need to correct. So that's telling me that there's too much metal all in this edge here. Too much metal. So we need to shrink that to actually gather all that metal together and get it out. So I'm going to quick hit this with the hammer and dolly just to fold this edge over a little bit, And then we'll keep going here. So that was just that top edge that we couldn't get into. Here on the bottom, I got a little overlap where we didn't make our cut quite big enough. So we're gonna cut this. Oops. Cut this off. Okay, so we cut our little excess off there. Those tuned up. So, got to shrink these. So we're pretty much done with the bead roller portion, which worked pretty well. Without me talking, we probably would have been done that a little bit quicker, but we did pretty good. And if you got any questions, Scott, feel free to shout them out as I'm swapping over here.
Dan just asked, do you recommend a guide for the tipping dies?
So Dan asked if we recommend a guide for the tipping dies. A guide is always a good idea. The only thing you have to remember with a guide is that your cut that we have along this edge here, the back edge, it needs to be perfect. Otherwise, your guide isn't going to do you any good because your guide's going to follow your line on the backside. So unless you got a laser perfect cut on the backside, it may not help you. Now, it's really good if you're doing straight lines. It works really well. Sometimes it gets a little tough because with all these little ridges here, it's gonna give you a little trouble. But a guide isn't a bad thing. But after you do the tipping die a couple times, it's really not that hard to follow that line. You just got to go light pressure, nice and slow, and score a line in it. So guides are nice, but once you do a little bit of bead rolling, you'll probably get pretty used to doing one without. But I definitely suggest having a guide because when you're rolling straight beads, man, it's really helpful to have a guide that you can run a nice laser straight line, especially if it's something that's long that you can see on the side of a vehicle, like a belt line or anything like that, running boards. All right, so I got a shrinker stretcher set up here. We got this cool little plate that saves me having to take the shrinker and stretcher on and off of the vise. It was such a pain doing that for so many years. So now that we got this little plate here, it's awesome. We can just put it right in there, and I leave the set screw loose, and I can just use the handle and go back and forth, shrink, stretch. So, I'm trying to think. You want me to spin? I'll spin this around so you can see, because otherwise my back's going to be to you guys pretty much the whole time. And we're going to close your eyes. Close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. I'm not using a body hammer for hammering. All right. Swap that guy around there. All right. So this is kind of the home stretch, if you will, but this section you could spend, I mean, yesterday when I was making this panel, I spent way too much time going back and forth trying to dial in the shape really good. And but you can get this pretty close pretty quickly. It just depends how nice you want to make it or how perfect you want to make it. These pieces weren't perfect to begin with from the factory in 1928, but it's always nice to try and get them as close as you can. So we're on our shrinker here. So the shrinker, if you're not familiar, has serrated jaws that when you pull down on the handle, they grab the metal and they bunch them together. So we're going to put this in. If you haven't seen it, well, maybe we'll try and get it here. So we'll just show you on the shrinker. Stretcher's the opposite. So pull down and it grabs together. So you clamp the metal, grab it, and it pulls together. So that pulling action is where it's bunching the metal together. So we got all these tucks. You want me to do the stretch, or you're good? Why not?
Okay, go ahead.
So stretch is the opposite. You'll see it pulls apart. So it's pulling those jaws apart, doing the same thing, grabbing, pulling apart. It's a lot easier to stretch the metal than it is to shrink. And you can work back and forth with these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of work around these spots. And the beginning here, it's a little tough because we got to get these little guys out. Somehow we messed her. There we go. You release. We're using this without the metal in it, and it popped. There we go. I was going too crazy there. All right. So we got our first little pucker. And I'm gonna. Now you could hammer these out, but we're gonna try and get these little guys in. Try not to block the camera here. And here, go this way. This is difficult when you're used to working alone, not with a camera live. It's kind of difficult. You gotta remember, I don't want to block the camera for you guys. So I'm just kind of going on either side of that little spot. I got another one down here. I'm gonna grab. I'm just kind of going to lightly do throughout the panel. I know down here at the bottom it's going to need more than it did up top, so I'm doing a couple extra ones in between the tucks there. And I'm not I'm not hanging my whole weight off of this. A common mistake I've seen with beginners, they think that the tool is going to work better if you hang more weight off of it. This tool only goes so far. It has a stop. Once those jaws are out of travel, that's it. You don't get any more travel. You can do this as many times as you want within reason, so don't hang off of it. All it's going to do is it's going to break this fulcrum here. It's not meant to have a 200, 300-pound person hanging off of it, or maybe a 100-pound person, whatever. It's not meant to have you hanging all your weight or use all your strength on it. So up here, let's see here. Oop. So I know this pretty much needs shrinking most of the way, so I'm getting out these little tucks, and then I'm also and in the beginning here, it's going to fight you a little bit because you got to get through those tucks or those puckers till you shrink them out. Then the panel starts smoothing out a little bit, and you can slide a little easier. And also, these serrated jaws, they're kind of doing their job. They grab and got to wiggle a little bit to get it out. So, showed you before where we're at. That's after one round of shrinking. See, we don't have all those crazy potato chip type effect going on there. So I got this pretty much all flattened out here. Before I start stretching here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check my shape with this adjustable profile gauge we have, because I want to see where I'm at, how much stretching I need to do. I know I need to put a belly in it here at the top. So what I'm going to do, get this out of the way. So, got a piece here. So this guy here is our adjustable contour gauge that we sell. So all these knobs are adjustable, or you can loosen, It's got little slots throughout the whole thing. So you can pretty much, I think this is a 36-inch one. So I mean, we can do crazy shape with this down to, pretty much dead flat. So we don't need this whole piece, but it's nice to have. So what I like to do is just pick a section. I already put little marks on it here for myself. So I could go between these marks. So I'm going to go up here at the top. I got them all loose. So I'm going to go here, pretty much straight across. And I'm going to start by, we'll get these guys here tightened up so they're not drooping down on us. So starting with this one, I'm going to line it up with my mark, which I've already made. You can start wherever you want on it at the end. So I'm pushing down. I'm going to snug this one up. And I'm going to move over to the next one. Same thing. It's loose, tighten it down. And then this guy here, we're going to do the same thing. Tighten him down like that. And then I'm just going to do these ones to get us close. All right, so they're not fighting us. So I got little lines made on my piece, on my profile guide gauge, just so I can line it up each time with the edge here. It also has little holes in it, so you can put cleco holes. You can drill little holes in here, 1/8-inch holes, and put clecos in, and it'll hold it in place with clecos every single time, and then you have to weld the holes up. We're lucky enough that I got 2 edges here that I can just line up with and get us close. So I got this fitting pretty good, like that. There's a little curve in it here like that. So we're going to test this piece here. It looks pretty much dead flat. So there's my mark, there's my mark. So you see where we're at? Not even close. So what this is telling me is I need a lot of stretch in here so that it's gonna actually give it a belly in there. So it's gonna give the part a curve in there. So I'm gonna go over a piece, our stretcher here. And the stretcher, you gotta be a little careful. It moves metal a lot quicker and a lot more easy. So it's really, really easy to actually mark my stretch marks that we've already put on our paper because we know they're pretty close. We know that those stretch marks on the paper made it fit pretty good. So I'm going to try and work between those lines, and that should get me pretty close.
While you're stretching, Bob Green asks, can you over shrink the metal?
Over shrink the metal. So Bob asked, can you over shrink the metal? With the only thing that will happen is metal work hardens. So if you start shrinking too much, it's going to work harden to the point that the tool's not going to be able to do anything. Now, if you have a tool that has more strength, or if you use heat, you can shrink the metal even further. That's why they have power hammers or big industrial tools that you can do that with. But with the shrinker, you can go pretty far, and we can bend a crazy bend into this metal that it's not going to shrink too much. I mean, you really what will happen is you shrink and then you stretch and you go back and forth trying to adjust it. That's when it starts work hardening because you're just moving it around too much. But you can't really shrink it too much. All it's going to do is the more you shrink it, the more shape it's going to put into it. So no, not really, not too much is my half answer. So I'm gonna hit here right in the center. We're trying to get these outside edges to kind of pull up and the center to drop down to match that. So I can feel it as I'm putting those little, and I'm only working about half the flange right now. It it stretches so easily that I don't want to go too crazy here. That's what happened yesterday. I got a little overzealous and I stretched this top way too much, put a huge belly in it, and then I was working back and forth, which happens, doesn't hurt anything. It's just, like I said, you can work hard in it if you get too far into it. So I'm probably doing about a half pull, if you will. You see, I got to bend this up. So it's going to be hard to tell. We'll probably take it back to the bench here and show. That section there just needed a little attention. I'll do this so you can see what the heck I'm doing. So I'm just hammering out a little spot we couldn't get in there when we were doing it with the tipping die. Flatten that out, got that a little more. All right. So find my marks here. So we still see not quite as bad. We still got some rocking there. And actually, we probably didn't need to shrink as much as I did right in there. So we probably need to work this side right here to compensate and stretch in here to get it to pull out. And hopefully it'll pull this edge up a little bit. I may have to come back and shrink that section just a little bit, but let me see if I can hit over in here a little bit more. And feel free to shout out any questions, Scott, as I'm working here. So this is a part to me, a slow process. I'm not going to take this to metal finish today or anything like that, but I'm going to try and get it closer. So you can really see now, if you remember how it was when we started, much closer. I mean, it's fitting for about 70 or 80% of this piece here. And like I said, I think I stretched a little too far out in those last couple I did on the first round. So I think if I do a little more in here, it's going to bring that edge up out in this edge. And then we'll do a little more. We'll see if we can stretch all the way out here on the edge. That's going to put a belly in it. So we need to, I'm probably going to have to shrink a little in here to get it to come up. But before I go too crazy, let's check the other way, because I don't want to spend hours trying to fine-tune this panel. I know it's getting close, but I don't want to get too crazy focusing on this because we haven't even touched this edge here. What we're doing here is going to affect the panel all over, so we don't want to go too crazy with getting obsessed with working that. So this panel's got some curve both ways, which, let me see. Just by us taking those tucks out, I don't know if you can see the curve. I can turn it if you need be. But you can see this piece, how it's raised on both of those pieces. So all we did here was just take out those puckers, that extra material, and by doing that, we didn't go crazy shrinking it. All we did was just take it out and get it flat, but by doing that, it's giving it that nice curve like this panel already has. So you don't want to go crazy, you just work back and forth, getting it close, and I can feel that has a nice flow to it. So let's check it with the profile gauge, see where we're at, and then see if we can get this pretty close. And then I'll finish up the edges, and then we'll see if you guys have any more questions and let you be on your way. So I do see here at the bottom we got a little bit of waviness. We'll have to take that out. It got a little bit of too much metal at the bottom there. So got my marks already kind of set. All right. Oh, there we go. So I had to find, I had 2 sets of marks here. So this is why it's nice to have the longer one, because you can kind of, you can use it on a short piece, you can use it on a longer piece, don't matter. Just kind of. So this guy down here is touching. You gotta make sure they're loose because you don't want it to give you a false reading. So I'm just pushing down, working our way across it. All right, so we got that fitting pretty good there. And make a better mark for myself just so I'm not fishing around for it every time. All right. Get him out of the way. Down here to the bottom. And look at that, pretty close. So just by taking those puckers out, that extra material, I didn't go too far, even though it was telling me I needed to shrink. Well, we don't really need to shrink that much. We mainly just needed to get the extra material away. So we're pretty darn close here. It might need a little up in the top here. I'm going to hit where right in here, this edge just kind of dives down a little bit. And these areas are difficult because you got shrink and stretch going on both pieces. But I'm going to just hit in here just a little bit, try and push that up. By shrinking it, it's going to push the material up. So we're going to hit just this edge, just a tiny bit, not too much, and then see where we're at. So I'm just going real light. I mean, I can feel it move. When you're holding the piece, if you got your hand nice and tight on it, you can kind of feel it give just a little bit, and you can feel that stretch. It's good to be in tune with that, because if you're just blindly pulling the handle, that's where you start over shrinking a piece or over stretching it, and then it gets all wild and out of control, and then you're spending hours fighting it. So I brought it up a little bit. So just that. All right. So right there and there, we are getting darn close. I mean, this piece is fitting pretty good. At top corner, I would probably just tiny bit more work it, but you might even be able to just hammer and dollie a little bit on dollie, just inside of there, and just bring it up just a little bit. But that's fitting pretty good. So the last thing we got to address here is just same thing at the bottom. Every piece of metal is different. Every job is different. When I did this yesterday, I didn't really have to, I didn't have any big puckers like this in the metal, or nothing like this. This one, I don't know if it's because of the way the number of times we went back and forth, or what I did in here caused something weird. I couldn't tell you. I'm not quite that good, but I can tell you that there's too much metal here. We need to get rid of this little bit in here. So I'm going to go back in the shrinker, just shrink them up. It doesn't really need that much shape at the bottom. It just needs to not be all wavy. If there is shape, there's just a tiny bit where it sweeps kind of back. But that's where I would get to the point where I get it about where we're at now for my test piece, or my rusty old piece, and I keep pulling that out. There we go. These are nice fresh jaws on these, so they're pretty grabby. I'm used to my worn out one at home that slides easier. So hit that last little one there. I don't know if we're going to be able to get in on that one. Probably not. I'll have to hammer that out. So you can see, got rid of that crazy waviness in there. Light pressure. I was just going enough that I felt that it was smoothing it out along the way. It's pretty good. So I'll hit this with the hammer and dolly to flatten it up, pound these edges over, and we should be pretty good. Any questions, Scott, as we're starting to wrap up here?
No, just right now we're acquiring a list of things that some of our customers want to see in future videos.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I love hearing that. Unless you guys want to keep watching me work on Model A projects, because that's all I seem to have right now, give us some ideas. We want to hear what you guys are working on, and we'll do our best to show you. I'm just closing these gaps up here. So I have a little sharp edge here where I need to hit it probably with the file, but you can round it over a little bit with the hammer onto itself. And hit this right here. So, there we go. So we got this panel here, just like that one. There's a little bit what I did yesterday, somewhere in here, and it's almost impossible to pick up on the camera, but right in about here, because this piece isn't stamped and we're using the Shrinker Stretcher, there's a little area in here where I need to hit with the English wheel to kind of blend these two transitions this way, concave, and then this way. So you got to kind of blend in up here because it's got a little harsh transition. So what I did with the English wheel is I just rolled just a tiny bit in here. It brought it out a little bit and kind of blended the two of them together. I'm trying to get myself better where I work the metal more than I do body filler. So I took the time to go in there. You could work it even more, get it fitting really good. But at this point, I'm basically at the point where we're at here, where I'd start fitting it to the car, tuning up your gaps. Like here you can see I got a little big of a gap here. So I'll work that with the hammer and dolly to just bring that edge up a little bit. It may just be bent down too hard. And just start working your gaps. But, I mean, we got, what, maybe an hour we got into this piece here with talking back and forth. And we got a cowl panel made for the side of this. Attack every panel like that. Doesn't matter if you have a Model A, a Bugatti, whatever you're doing. The process that coach builders are using is basically the same as what I'm doing here. You know, with diagnosing the panel, making gauges, or using adjustable gauges. You get a pattern, diagnose the panel, and just slowly work the panel and check it back and forth. So that's what I've got made here. If you guys, is there any other questions?
Last one, just Reginald asked if they're marked separate between the Shrinker and the Stretcher.
Okay, so Reginald asked if they're marked separate between the Shrinker and Stretcher. On our machines, we did go ahead and put stampings in the faces of the jaws so that it tells you if it's shrink or stretch. Now you can buy a single body and then you can buy the jaws and you can swap them back and forth. If you're really, really on the budget, it does work. But man, after you do it a couple times, imagine when I was going back and forth if I had to take these out and slide a new one in. This would have taken forever. So it's great to get the two bodies, but yes, they are marked shrink and stretch. If you're unsure, you do just like we showed before we started using these. Bring them down, and if it grabs together, that's shrinking. If you pull it over here and you grab it and it's pulling apart, the jaws are pulling apart, then we know we're stretching. So these are helpful, but not necessary all the time. So yes, they are marked. So that's all our questions. We'll take a look at what you guys gave us for ideas for future videos. Thank you so much for everybody that watched. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Username is Eastwood Co. We have lots of videos that go more in depth on these tools, as well as more projects like I'm doing here that are longer videos you can watch. Subscribe to the channel, you'll get notifications. And then also make sure you like our Facebook page, again, at Eastwood Co. if you're watching somewhere else. Follow along there, and you can get everything that is Eastwood, get updated. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys later.